good, both of you. Have you always been good?
We've tried to be.
The untold truth of Don't Stop the Music Singer's tragic life and end starts with a love story that became a business nightmare.
How long have you two known each other?
How long have we not known each other?
Is it since little bitty kids?
Yes.
Where?
We were in elementary school, I would say first, second grade.
Two voices that defined early 80s R&B couldn't survive the industry that made them famous.
A lot of folks mourning on this evening after hearing about the loss of a popular music duo lead. Kevin Yarbrough has died at the age of 72.
Behind the harmony was a marriage tested by drugs, infidelity, and the pressure of separating romance from business deals gone wrong. So, let's get into it. Dallas in the late 70s was a breeding ground for soul music that nobody outside Texas knew about yet. Kevin Yarbrough had been grinding in local studios, writing songs, producing tracks, building a reputation as someone who understood R&B at a molecular level. Alisa Peoples was singing in church, her voice carrying the kind of power that made people stop conversations mid-sentence to listen. They met through the music scene, the way most creative partnerships begin. Mutual friends, shared studios, overlapping circles where everyone knew everyone, and talent mattered more than connections. Kevin heard Alisa sing and recognized something special. Not just a good voice, but the right voice, the complement to his own sound that could create something neither of them could achieve alone.
Years ago, when you were little children, suffice to say, did your musical careers follow parallels? You go along?
Yes. Kevin left and he traveled with the Gap Band and Leon Russell, and he came back and he shared his experience with me.
The chemistry was immediate. Musical chemistry at first, the way their voices blended, how her range filled spaces his couldn't reach, how his tone grounded her flights into higher registers. They started recording together casually, testing combinations, finding their sound through experimentation that felt more like play than work. Then the musical chemistry became personal. By 1980, Kevin and Alisa weren't just making music together. They were Yarbrough and Peoples, a duo whose sound captured something happening in R&B, a shift towards synthesizers and electronic production that felt futuristic but maintained soul music's emotional core. Their demo tapes circulated through industry channels, landing eventually at Total Experience Records in Los Angeles. The label wanted them, wanted their sound, their look, their potential to capture the market that was hungry for exactly what they were offering. Kevin and Alisa packed up their Dallas life and moved west, leaving behind family, community, everything familiar. They were chasing success together, convinced that their musical partnership was strong enough to withstand whatever the industry threw at them.
We started working together in 75. We started writing together. We were working together, if you want to call it work.
Los Angeles hit them like a freight train. The city moved faster than Dallas, demanded more, offered temptations that didn't exist in their church-centered Texas community. The studio sessions at Total Experience were professional, well-funded, everything they'd dreamed about. But they were also grueling, driven by label executives who saw Yarbrough and Peoples as a product to be maximized rather than artists to be nurtured. Recording their first album meant long hours where they had to function as business partners while navigating their personal relationship. Kevin would have creative ideas that Alisa disagreed with. Alisa would suggest directions that Kevin thought compromised their sound. These weren't just artistic differences. They were couple fights happening in front of producers, engineers, label executives who didn't care about their relationship dynamics and just wanted hit songs. The pressure of being both romantic partners and business collaborators created friction neither of them had anticipated. They couldn't leave work at the studio because they lived together. They couldn't separate personal disagreements from professional decisions. Every conversation about the album became a potential relationship issue. Every relationship issue affected their creative output. Their debut album dropped in 1980. The singles failed to make significant impact. Total Experience wasn't happy. Kevin and Elisa felt the pressure mounting. They'd moved across the country, left everything behind, staked their relationship on this musical partnership. Now the music wasn't connecting the way everyone had predicted it would. But they kept working and pushing through the tension, because giving up meant admitting failure on multiple levels. Their relationship became defined by their work. They were Yarbrough and Peoples before they were Kevin and Elisa. The music consumed everything, leaving little room for the personal connection that had brought them together initially. 1981 brought the breakthrough that justified every sacrifice they'd made. Don't Stop the Music hit radio like lightning, the synthesizer-driven groove and their intertwined vocals creating something that felt new and familiar simultaneously. The song climbed charts, crossing over from R&B to pop, making Yarbrough and Peoples household names practically overnight. Success arrived with velocity that left them scrambling to adjust. Radio interviews, television appearances, concert bookings. The full machinery of 80s music industry promotion descended on them. They were suddenly representing not just themselves but a sound, a moment, a cultural shift toward electronic soul that was reshaping the genre.
Don't you stop it, don't you stop the music.
The touring schedule became relentless. City after city, venue after venue, performing Don't Stop the Music and their other songs for audiences who mostly just wanted that one hit. The grind of touring tests any relationship, but for Kevin and Elisa, it meant being together constantly while having almost no private time, no space to be a couple outside of being Yarbrough and Peoples. Money started flowing in for the first time in their careers. Not life-changing wealth, but enough to feel secure, to buy things they'd never been able to afford, to send money back to family in Dallas. But the money also brought new tensions. Total Experience controlled their finances. Kevin and Elisa received portions of what they were earning while the label kept the rest, justified through contracts they'd signed when they were desperate for opportunity. The financial arrangement started bothering Kevin particularly. He'd look at sold-out venues, calculate ticket sales, see Don't Stop the Music on charts and in stores, then look at their bank account and feel the numbers didn't match. He wasn't a businessman initially, but success was teaching him business lessons, showing him how artists get taken advantage of when they don't understand the industry's financial structures. Elisa felt it too, but differently. Her focus stayed more on the music, on performing, on maintaining the quality that had brought them success. The business side felt like Kevin's domain, a division of labor that worked until it meant Kevin was handling stress that bled into their personal life without her fully understanding why he seemed increasingly angry about their situation. The follow-up single Guilty cemented their status as hitmakers.
It's all because I'm guilty of wanting you.
Two major songs from one album, both climbing charts, both getting radio play, both establishing Yarbrough and Peoples as more than one-hit wonders. The validation felt good initially. They'd proven themselves. They belonged in the industry's upper tier. But sustained success meant sustained pressure. Total Experience wanted another album immediately, wanted to capitalize on momentum, wanted more hits before the public moved on to the next thing. Kevin and Elisa found themselves back in the studio while still touring, trying to write and record while exhausted, trying to recapture magic while being told to essentially recreate what they'd already done. The creative pressure strained their relationship in new ways. Success had proven their partnership worked, but it had also raised stakes. Now they weren't just trying to make good music. They were trying to maintain careers, satisfy label expectations, live up to their own previous work. The joy of creating together got buried under the weight of industry demands. Their second album emerged from this pressure cooker environment. The songs were good, professional, well-produced, but something felt different. The singles performed well but didn't match Don't Stop the Music's cultural impact. Yarbrough and Peoples were successful but no longer groundbreaking. They'd become part of the industry machine rather than artists reshaping it, exactly the fate they'd hoped to avoid when they first arrived in Los Angeles. The Los Angeles music scene in the early 80s moved on drugs, sex, and ego. Studios opened 24 hours because artists worked whenever inspiration or substances hit.
Don't you stop it, don't you stop.
Parties started after midnight and ran until dawn. The line between professional networking and personal excess didn't just blur, it disappeared entirely. Kevin and Elisa had come from Dallas church communities, where moral boundaries were clear, where excess was discouraged, where accountability existed through family and congregation. Los Angeles offered none of that structure. Instead, it offered freedom that felt liberating initially and dangerous eventually. The first time either of them tried cocaine, it felt like betraying everything they'd believed about themselves. But Los Angeles had a way of reframing things, making excess seem normal, making resistance seem prudish. Drug use started affecting their work. Los Angeles was breaking them in ways that success alone couldn't have. By 1985, both Kevin and Elisa recognized they were in trouble. The life they were living didn't reflect who they'd been or who they wanted to be. The success they'd achieved had come at costs they hadn't anticipated and weren't sure they could afford to keep paying. Something had to change before Los Angeles took everything from them. Total Experience Records operated like most labels of the era. They advanced money for recording, controlled distribution, handled promotion, and took the largest percentage of revenue. Artists received royalties after recoupment, a system that kept most musicians perpetually in debt to their labels, while the labels profited from their work. Kevin had been learning this system the hard way. The more he learned, the angrier he became. They were the talent. They wrote the songs, performed them, promoted them, but the financial structure meant they received the smallest share of revenue they generated. Total Experience controlled everything, owned their recordings, dictated terms. Kevin and Elisa were employees of their own careers, working to enrich a label that treated them as assets rather than partners. Kevin pushed for renegotiation, for contract terms that reflected their proven commercial value. Total Experience resisted, arguing that the existing contracts were binding, that renegotiation wasn't standard practice, that Yarbrough and Peoples should be grateful for the opportunity they'd been given rather than demanding more. By 1986, the creative partnership that had produced hits was collapsing under financial resentment. Kevin made the decision that Elisa initially resisted. They were leaving Total Experience, breaking their contract if necessary, walking away from the label that had made them famous because staying meant continuing to be exploited. The decision was risky, potentially career-ending, but staying felt worse than leaving.
We were walking, you actually walked out and out of the Total Experience.
Total Experience threatened legal action. They owned Yarbrough and Peoples' recordings, controlled their masters, could prevent them from recording for other labels. The leverage was real and substantial. But Kevin called their bluff, betting that the label wouldn't want the public relations nightmare of suing their former hitmakers, betting that the industry would side with artists over labels in a dispute about fair compensation. Leaving Total Experience meant leaving Los Angeles too. The city had never felt like home. It had been where their careers existed, where the industry demanded they live, without the label anchoring them there. Without the constant studio sessions and industry parties, Los Angeles lost whatever appeal it had ever held. They packed up and returned to Dallas. Back to family, back to community, back to the church environment where they'd started. The return felt like retreat to some observers, like failure to others. But for Kevin and Elisa, it felt like survival, like escaping before Los Angeles took everything from them, including their relationship and their lives. Dallas in 1986 welcomed them back without judgment. The church they'd attended before fame embraced them as returned members rather than failed celebrities. Family asked about their experiences but didn't pry into details they weren't ready to share. The community provided stability that Los Angeles had never offered. Kevin and Elisa took positions as music directors at their church, using their industry experience to elevate the congregation's musical program. They arranged songs, trained vocalists, produced recordings for church use. The work was unpaid but meaningful in ways their commercial success had never been. They were serving their community rather than being exploited by an industry. But they weren't done with music professionally. Leaving Total Experience didn't mean abandoning their careers. It meant taking control of those careers, building infrastructure that let them work on their terms rather than label terms. Kevin started researching independent production, learning about distribution deals that didn't require signing away ownership, understanding how artists could maintain control while still reaching audiences. They established Yarbrough and People's Productions, a company that existed to manage their own work and potentially help other artists avoid the exploitation they'd experienced. The company was small, operating from Dallas, without the overhead of Los Angeles studios and industry machinery. But it was theirs, fully owned and controlled, accountable only to themselves.
It was more our production. He didn't put as much money behind those records. Again, the atmosphere was changing.
Recording independently meant financing recordings themselves, a risk when they weren't wealthy despite their previous success. But it also meant keeping the rights to their work, controlling how it was released and promoted, receiving fair compensation when it sold. The trade-off seemed worth it to Kevin especially, who'd become convinced that artist ownership was the only sustainable model. Their first independent release tested whether Yarbrough and Peoples could succeed outside the major label system. The album didn't have the promotional push that Total Experience had provided. Radio stations weren't handed singles by label representatives. Distribution was limited compared to major label reach. But the music reached their existing fans, generated enough revenue to recoup costs, proved that independence was viable, even if it wasn't as lucrative as major label success. Elisa discovered she preferred this new arrangement. The pressure was different, self-imposed rather than externally demanded. The financial model worked differently too. They made less money overall but kept larger percentages of what they did make. More importantly, they understood where every dollar came from and where it went. No opaque accounting, no mysterious recoupment calculations, no waiting for royalty statements that never matched expectations. The transparency brought peace that wealth hadn't provided. Their relationship improved dramatically once they separated their marriage from industry pressures. They were still musical partners, but that partnership existed within a framework they controlled. Business decisions happened in office settings, distinct from home life. Creative differences were just creative differences, not relationship crises affecting their livelihood. In 1987, a year after returning to Dallas and establishing their independence, Kevin and Elisa married formally. They'd been partners for years but had never formalized their relationship, always focused on the career, always waiting for the right time. Back in Dallas, grounded in community and church, with their careers restructured on sustainable terms, the time felt right. Marriage changed their dynamics subtly but significantly.
So we work perfectly together, especially when we're creating.
They had a formal commitment to each other that superseded their professional partnership. When business disagreements arose, they had their marriage to fall back on, a foundation that reminded them of shared priorities beyond music. The separation of identities, wife and husband distinct from musical partners, created healthy boundaries that had been missing during their Los Angeles years. They continued making music through their production company, releasing albums that reached smaller audiences than Don't Stop the Music had reached, but satisfied them creatively. They mentored younger artists, sharing industry knowledge, warning them about exploitative contracts, helping them build careers that didn't require sacrificing their values or relationships. The Dallas music community appreciated having them back. Yarbrough and Peoples became elders, examples of artists who'd achieved mainstream success and returned to nurture local talent. They produced tracks for church choirs, for aspiring soul singers, for anyone who approached them with genuine talent and work ethic. The giving back felt right, like using their experience and skills for purposes larger than personal gain. Heart disease announces itself gradually. Fatigue that seems normal at first. Shortness of breath that gets dismissed as aging. Kevin Yarbrough experienced these symptoms for years without recognizing them as warnings from a body that was breaking down at a fundamental level. The early signs appeared in his 60s, subtle enough that he attributed them to getting older, to decades of performing and traveling, to the normal decline that happens to everyone eventually. On June 19, 2025, Kevin Yarbrough's heart stopped beating at 72 years old, ending a life that had been defined by music, marriage, and the complicated intersection of both.
Of the 80s, a lot of folks mourning on this evening after hearing about the loss of a popular music duo lead. Kevin Yarbrough has died at the age of 72.
The marriage that had started in 1987, after they'd returned to Dallas, was celebrated as a model of partnership. Not perfect, never pretending to be, but real. They'd figured out how to be married while making music together, how to separate business from personal life, how to maintain individual identities while functioning as a unit. The balance they'd achieved was rare and valuable. Elisa's life after Kevin's death became about honoring his memory while living her own. She continued working in music, kept Yarbrough and Peoples' catalog available, performed occasionally when circumstances felt right. But she also established space for grief, for processing loss, for rebuilding an identity that had been tied to partnership for so long. Kevin Yarbrough's death ended Yarbrough and Peoples as an active musical entity, but it couldn't end what they'd created together, the songs that still connected with listeners decades after recording, the example they'd provided of how to prioritize love over fame. The proof that success doesn't require sacrificing your soul to an industry that doesn't value it. Elisa remained in Dallas, surrounded by community that had supported them through every phase. She kept Kevin's memory alive through stories and music, through continued involvement in the church they'd served together, through connections with artists they'd mentored. Her grief was private, but her celebration of their life together was public, shared with everyone who'd been touched by their music or inspired by their story. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.